To you to talk about, oh no. Hi guys, Kim Howerton here. Let's talk latkes, shall we? So, for those of you that don't know, why would you know? But half my family's Jewish, half my family's Christian. We celebrate all the things. And so I have really great memories of going to my Aunt Ellen's house every Hanukkah and having latkes along with saucy brisket. I have to say, I'm missing that saucy brisket these days. I have to make that again. Some of you might call it braised brisket, but it's different than what you get like at a Texas barbecue. It's just a totally different thing. So it's not like one is better. It's just like different. Anyway, but I miss that saucy brisket. Gonna make some, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about latkes. And why am I sitting in front of my sofa on the floor? Well, there was a good table here to put the latkes on and it worked out and the kitchen was still dirty. So here's the deal. Latkes. Latkes are traditionally made with potato, and potato is not your best bet for a low-carb ketogenic diet, at least most of the time. It's pretty carby. And so I was looking at alternatives, and I've made lots of alternatives in the past. There's even on my YouTube channel a recipe for zucchini fritters. And in my cookbook, there's a recipe for latkes using spaghetti squash. You can use all sorts of things. You can use spaghetti squash, zucchini, celeriac, rutabaga, turnips, and well, let's just talk about my experience. I tried a ton of different things to make what I think of as a traditional-ish latke. What does that mean? Well, basically, it's mostly just the grated potato-like substance, a little bit of egg, spices, maybe some onion, definitely some onion thrown in there in the mix, and then fried in either olive oil or chicken fat, which is called Schmaltz, which I like the name, so we're going with Schmaltz. When you start cooking in Schmaltz, it smells like fried chicken in your house. It's delicious. So anyway, but if you don't do that, then do olive oil. I know you'd be like, why not avocado oil? You could do avocado oil. I just like olive oil better. And it's actually a little more traditional in terms of the old school. They'd have olive oil, probably not avocado oil in the places that they were making latkes. There you go. So let's talk about how the different things came out. So in this experiment, I was going for the most potato-ish latke experience. And so I started with celeriac, and that came out amazing, amazing, amazing. I tried kohlrabi. Sorry, for some reason my memory requires me to roll my eyes up in the top of my head. I tried kohlrabi. Kohlrabi I had really high hopes for because I always think kohlrabi tastes very potato-y to me. Terrible, awful, no good, very bad. It absorbed all the oil and they were just greasy and falling apart and don't recommend. Okay, so then I tried rutabaga, and rutabaga was great. Rutabaga was very similar to celery, which is also called celeriac. And then I also tried turnip, and I didn't have the best hopes for turnip when I was doing it because as I was shredding it, by the way, at the end of this, after I talk about latkes, I have a little video of me making latkes. So if you're looking for how to make latkes, you can jump to that part, but I'm just gonna talk for a little more, okay? I'll put in the notes where how you can jump if you're like, shut it. Just show me how to do it, okay? You can go on. Okay, so, but for the rest of us, let's continue. So, turnips, was it turnips? Yeah, purple top turnips, that's what I used. And when I was shredding it, they were just super wet. It was like wet. And I thought this is never gonna work. It actually worked. So what you do is you shred the vegetable, you then salt the vegetable, you then drain and you let it sit, and the salt pulls more moisture out of the vegetable. And so after about 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, they're gonna be dehydrated a little bit, not completely, but quite a bit. And then you squeeze and you squeeze and you squeeze over a colander and you get as much liquid out as you possibly can. And then you're ready to add the spices and the egg and fry them. That's really it. So you can watch me doing it later. One of the things that we want to look at if you're on a ketogenic or low carb diet is you're probably pretty concerned with the carb count of said vegetables. So I have made a handy dandy little picture that shows you the carb counts of all of these different things. So let's pull that up.
So you can see from this picture if I were making latkes, I'd probably say about what turns out to be 5 ounces of potato turns into about a serving of latkes. So we're going with that as a unit of measure. And you can see that that would be 26 grams of carbs just from the potato, way too carby. Now, in order of descending carb counts, you can see that celeriac is 13 grams of carbs per 5 ounces. Rutabaga comes in right behind that at 12. You're dropping down to 9 for the spaghetti squash, the radish, and the kohlrabi. Give or take a little bit. I rounded just a bit, but not a lot. And then it goes down to 7 if you get to cauliflower, and all the way down to 4.5 when you get to zucchini. So that's a huge difference across these materials. However, there's more to it than that.
So I shredded 10 ounces of material. 10 ounces of celeriac, 10 ounces of zucchini. Note there's a difference in the outcome. I tried to make them about the same size. I think I mostly succeeded. Pretty close size. I keep covering my face. Pretty close in terms of size. I might have even made the celery root a little bit bigger, but I got 6 of the celery root. I got 4 of the zucchini. So in terms of the carb count I just went over, it might be a little bit deceiving, because in the end, when I drained the vegetables, the thing you don't think about maybe is zucchini is a very full of water vegetable, whereas celery root doesn't have as much water in it. And so by the time I drained the vegetables and squeeze them, you get all the water out, I ended up with a lot more celery root than I ended up with zucchini. And so when I'm comparing them on an ounce for ounce basis, the carb count is perhaps not as accurate. I mean, the carb count is accurate, but in terms of what I'm actually eating.
Okay, I'm doing this part in voiceover because the math was too hard to do in my head. So we ended up with what you could say is 3 servings of 2 latkes out of the celeriac. And we ended up with 2 servings of 2 latkes out of the zucchini. So to compare oranges to oranges, the easiest way to look at this is a serving. And so in terms of a single serving, the celeriac ended up being 4 1/3 grams of total carbs for the 2 latkes, whereas for the zucchini, 2 latkes ended up being 2 1/4. So whereas when we were thinking about it before, it seemed like there was 3 times as many carbs in the celeriac. In fact, it's closer to 2, actually a little less than 2. So while the zucchini is still your lower carb choice, the difference is not as big as it seemed before. So I've done it with spaghetti squash, which you see here. We've seen already a version with zucchini, which you see again here. I also recently tried the kohlrabi, the celeriac, the turnip, and the rutabaga on this plate. And of these, the 3 came out great, except for the kohlrabi, which I mentioned got really greasy and breaky-uppy and weird. So you can see here, we've got the celeriac on top, then we got the turnip, then we got the rutabaga. All 3 I would recommend, but I think definitely the celeriac had a slight edge. So if you can get access to all of them, I'd say go with the celeriac.
It came out the best. It came out the most simple. Well, it's right here. I can show it to you. Yes, I am touching my food with my hands. It's not got a nice thickness. I've got a nice flavor. You can see the texture. So it was top notch. Rutabaga, pretty good second. So if you can't find celery root where you live and you can find rutabaga, go for the rutabaga. Very similar, but so celery root, the flavor is a little better. If you don't know what celery root tastes like, I bet you could guess. It tastes mostly like a potato with a hint of celery, which is kind of a nice flavor. So one of the things that I was interested in though is but that was kind of the highest carb option. right? And it came out the best, and that wasn't super surprising. The more it's like a potato, probably the better it's going to taste in terms of if potato was your bar. So I thought, okay, let's try the lowest carb experience, which is the zucchini. And we got here. So I've made zucchini pancakes for the longest time. I love them. They're amazing. They're fabulous. I don't think they taste quite like what I think of as a latke. They taste more like a zucchini fritter. So, but really good. But yeah, there's definitely more of a green vegetable taste. The texture's nice. They're held together well. So traditionally you'd serve them with a dollop of sour cream. It's a delicious way to serve them. Also some applesauce, but we're gonna skip that for the low carbers. If you do caviar, a little of caviar or some chives are delicious. So I think these came out really great. I made them really simple. You can make these all the time, honestly. You don't have to wait for Hanukkah. And I hope you enjoyed this little journey. I tend to like to think about food. Are you like me? If you're still watching, you probably are, or you're bored and cannot reach the buttons on your computer. But I like to think about these kinds of things because it's very easy to think, oh, well, zucchini has less carbs. It's better. I'm going to do that. We don't think about like, what's the end result? How satiating are those foods going to be? How satisfied am I going to be? Would I be willing to do a smaller amount because I'm getting a better experience than a bigger amount? So all of that goes into play. And so whichever version they're going to slip off, whichever version you make, I hope you truly enjoy. Now, these I made as basic as possible. They're literally spices, egg, onion, vegetable. You can add other things to your mix if you want. I don't find it as traditional, but how much does that matter? Enjoyment really matters. So if you want, like I often, in my zucchini fritter recipe, I add some Parmesan cheese. You can also use things like ground pork rinds, as long as you're not kosher. You can add things like a little bit of coconut flour if you want. All of that is possible to get the experience you're looking for. In terms of texture, I'll just say this. This is, again, firmer, more like a potato in the ways I think of. And these are softer, a little looser. I think the zucchini fritters could really benefit from a little sprinkling of parm or something along those lines, which is how I make them in my traditional fritter recipe, which you can find on YouTube. But they're delicious just this way as well. And, one of the things I really like, because I think it's important to like the thing you're eating for the thing it is, not the thing you're pretending it is, right? Like I'm all for copycats, obviously, but don't sacrifice the experience of the vegetable. Like zucchini is delicious in and of itself. Enjoy the zucchini flavor of it and embrace that. Don't try and disguise it. Or the celery root flavor. Like I love that it's a little different than a potato. It's got a little more of a acidy taste, a little bit more, how do you describe acidy? Like it's just a little brighter. It's a little sharper, but in a really subtle and delicious way. So, if you ever go to a super fancy restaurant, they really celebrate bringing in other flavors rather than just potato, which, God love a potato, but at the same time, celebrate the difference in flavor that you can get from these things. So anyway, that's my little sermon for you for today. I hope you enjoy and you can stay tuned and watch me making these so that you can see that it is super duper simple and you can totally do it. And I will see you soon.
Whatever vegetable you're using, you're going to start by removing the skin. Generally speaking, most of these require a knife, not a peeler. Oh, the exception, when you're using a zucchini, you don't have to peel that one. So just if you've got a root vegetable, peel off all the skin. If you need to rinse the vegetable off when you're done, you're good to go. Great, great, great. If you have a machine that does this for you, go ahead and use it. I'm going old school here. Build some muscle. Once you've got it all grated and not having grated your knuckles, watch out for the knuckles, people. You're going to also grate a bit of yellow onion. Then you're adding salt. So I measure that out. You're tossing that so that the salt is getting distributed. And then you're just going to let it sit at least 5 minutes. It can sit for 10, no problem. So let that sit. Now we're back to do the draining. So Transfer that all into a colander, and then you're going to just start pressing and squeezing and pressing and squeezing. So you can squeeze it between your hands, press it into the bottom of the colander. You just want to keep going until you get as much liquid as possible out, which will take you longer than you think it will. Don't squirt yourself in the eye. But just keep pressing, pressing, pressing. This should be a several minute process. And eventually you get to a place where you're like, yeah, I pretty much got the moisture out of this. And it is a nice solid pack. And we're going to go on to the next step from there. So break up that tight pack, make it loose, just spread it out with a fork and sprinkle over your garlic powder and onion powder. Just what looks like a good sprinkling. I do it by eyeball. Then you're going to mix that all up. So what we've got in here is that shredded onion. We've got our shredded vegetable of choice. In this case, it's the celeriac. If you feel like it needs a little bit more salt, add a little bit more salt. Spread that around, make sure the spices get well distributed. Then we're going to add our egg. You can see the zucchini waiting in the bowl next to it, but we're going to focus on the celeriac in this one. So here I'm just beating some egg, and I'm going to add that in small amounts to the vegetable. So I don't add it all at once because you don't want it too wet, and it can vary from time to time when you make it. So I start with adding about half of what I think I'll need, and then I just keep adding maybe a tablespoon at a time until I get the right texture. You want it wet enough with the egg that it holds together really well, but you don't want any extra liquid forming because you don't want it to be like eggy. You just want the egg as a binder. So you can see I'm just checking the texture, and when it's holding together well, sort of the texture almost of mashed potatoes, you can see that that is probably pretty good, and that's going to hold together in a nice latke. So that is good to go. You're going to start with a preheated pan to medium high. You want it already hot when you put your fat in. So here I've got my chicken fat. I'm going to add about 2.5 tablespoons of that. Let that heat. We want enough fat in the pan that it's going to have a nice layer of fat, but we don't need to submerge our latkes, but we want them to have a nice weighting depth, if you will. So once that's melted and that's hot and that's sizzling, you should get a little sizzle that you can see in the pan. You're ready to add your latkes. So I'm just scooping up what seems like the right amount. I'm doing these kind of small. You could do them bigger if you wanted to. About the size of the palm of my hand, flattening them out into a latke shape, and then just flopping them down in the oil. Don't splash, don't burn yourself. Here I'm going to show you what one celery root, one zucchini look like. So you can see on the left, hopefully I don't need to say this, but on the left you got the celery root, on the right you got the zucchini. You can see that sizzling oil. You can see it's not super deep, but it's deep enough that these are not going to stick to the pan. I swirl it around a little bit as I go, mostly because my stove's a little uneven, so it tends to pool on one side. And you want to make sure they're not sticking to the bottom. So if you need to take your little spatula, kind of scooch it under a little bit to loosen it up, feel free to do that. I broke it. But I'm not trying to pick them up right now. I'm just making sure they're not sticking too much. And we're going to cook them for just a few minutes here until they are done on that side, and flip them over. I find it helpful to use a second spatula rather than, I don't know, sticking my finger into boiling hot oil, because they can be a little flimsy at first. And when they look like they're ready to flip, go ahead and give them a flip. The zucchini has a tendency to get browner, to get that browning. Just consider it part of its charm. Whereas the celery root turns a little more golden. When they seem like they're done, give them a flip, check it out. Everybody has their own preference on how done you want it. Both zucchini and celery root are vegetables that can be eaten raw. So what you're mostly looking for is the texture you want and the doneness and the crispiness that you want. Move them to a paper towel lined plate, and then just continue until you're done with all of your latkes. So here I'm going to do the batch of all of the rest of the celeriac, and you can see that on fast forward. Oh, if you want to reheat these, I recommend the oven over the microwave, but you do what works for you. So thank you for joining me on this deep dive into all things latke, and I hope you enjoyed. And if you have questions, comments, thoughts, whatever, please let me know. Put them in the comments. I want to hear from you. And also, just a reminder, my zucchini fritter recipe is available on YouTube. I will put links in the description so you can get to all the things. Thanks for watching. Bye.